Hey Patrick, remember how in college we bonded over the Fallout series?
Yeah.
And now we're here with one of the original Fallout creators?
Yeah.
Isn't it great when life comes full circle?
Yeah.
We have Tim Cain with us today, and if our listeners haven't seen, heard, or played any of Tim's games, I have a quick little breakdown. Game designer, programmer, producer, director, and project leader. I think I got most of those titles down. Co-founder of Troika Games. I loved Vampire, by the way, and previously worked with Interplay and Obsidian. Known for his work on games like South Park: Stick of Truth, The Outer Worlds, The Temple of Elemental Evil, Arcanum of Steamwarp and Magic Obscura, and of course Fallout, among several others. And most recently, a YouTube star. We have Tim Cain here today. So, Tim, welcome. Thank you for being here. And if you want to give a quick intro for our listeners too, go right ahead.
Well, no, thank you very much. I think you covered everything. The YouTube star is probably stretching it. I just decided during the pandemic I would start telling stories every morning about game development, and people seem to like hearing those.
Val, I think 113,000 people like
Yeah.
in
Yeah, yeah.
under a year. Yeah, that is. I mean, all things that you've done are super incredible. All the things that Jason listed, but even just like in the span of a year to have that much of a following that respects you is so.
I was
cool.
surprised though.
Yeah.
I honestly thought it'd be a few thousand people, and we just chat about games. And now it's
And
a
here we
lot,
are.
and there's a lot of
Well,
chatting.
I think on our episode today, we will have plenty of time to chat games, but I think one thing, or where I want to start the episode, is maybe start digging into life a little more. And I think one of the reasons why is I don't know very often if the great stories of how some of the great people came to be in the video game industry. So I
Mm.
kind of would love to talk about some of the things in your life that got you into game development or being a gay male creator, especially in the era that you were creating games. So we have a lot of things that we're going to cover in today's episode. But I think where I want to start with you is just very beginning, early stuff. And which video game sparked that passion to become a gaming
Mm.
developer?
I think
Take us back to young Tim.
it's the
Young Tim.
80s.
Yeah.
This
Parachute
magical
pants,
time.
bright colors.
Yeah.
Pepsi was clear, or that might have been the 90s. I think. Well, I had an Atari console.
Mm.
We know
with the
those are.
cartridges.
Yeah.
I
They
had
were
one.
amazing. It blew young Tim's brain that this
Mhm.
one console you could just pull out a cartridge and put in a new one, and it instantly played a new game. And when my high school, like in my freshman years, I was 14. They got Atari 800 computers. Those also could play games in cartridges, and they were far better. In fact, Star Raiders was
Mhm.
just the most amazing game in my brain. But Richard Garriott started making Ultimas, his Ultima series
Mhm.
RPG, and they came out for the Atari. And I remember spending an entire summer playing Ultima 3,
Oh man.
and I really, really, really wanted to make something like that. But I thought I'll go to college. I know how to code already, but I'll get like a thorough grounding in it. I really liked college, so I kept going and went to grad school, and then finally went back into the game industry because I funded my college, most of my college, by making tools for a local game company, and then eventually making a bridge game with them. And I don't even play bridge. It was I converted a designer's flowcharts into C.
I
But
love that you mentioned Ultima 3 because I'm a
Mm.
little bit of an Ultima fan as well. I think I jumped in a little bit later. I think Ultima either 6 or 7 was one of my first computer experiences. But I guess thinking in this era of young Tim and thinking of how games have developed over the years, what would young Tim say about video games now?
Mm.
Like, would your mind have been blown, or
Jumping into
would
the
you...
hard questions, Patrick.
Yeah.
Young Tim's head would explode because it's hard for people to understand it when I put it this way, but people thought video games were stupid and a fad,
Mhm.
and only children like them. So
Mhm.
I can't stress how frequently I was told. Because I had in high school. I actually got the job offered to me when I was 15, but they couldn't hire me until I was 16. So the day I turned 16, my mom took me to the DMV. I got my license, and I drove out to a game company and started working.
Wow.
And
That is incredible.
Mhm.
you would think all my friends were like, "That's so cool." I had a friend who was working at the Naval Research Labs over in Maryland, and he said, "When are you going to get a real job?" And I thought it was cool what I was doing, but then I went to college and I was at engineering school at the University of Virginia, and those people were all saying like, "I interned, you know, at this place, or I worked for some engineering firm," and I'm like, "Oh, during the summer I helped make computer games," and they're like, it wasn't cool, and it was also very small. It was niche, and telling people that
about
now.
what year would this have been too, just so people can have an idea?
I worked there from 1981 to 1986.
Okay.
So I graduated college in 1987, and I was supposed to go work for another company making a compiler, and that job fell through. So that was the last summer I didn't work.
Do you what point do you think that this whole notion of video games is a fad versus an actual hobby or career, or just being more than the medium people like in the box that people set it in? At what point do you think that we saw that change? Because I know Jason and I, being content creators, being gamers for life, like literally I like came out of the womb playing
The controller was attached.
like basically, and I know for Jason it's very similar. Like we've had our own struggles with being like nerds and gamers, and using nerd as an endearing term, not as a negative term, but I know for us it was used negatively. So I guess, like, when do you think that transition officially, not I'm gonna say officially happened, because there's always gonna be a stigma, but when do you think it started to change where people took video games a lot more serious as a medium?
For me, it happened somewhere in the mid 90s. And I say that because I was in a PhD program at University of California, Irvine. I'd gotten my master's. I was working on my PhD. I had a PhD thesis advisor. And I decided to leave in 1991 to go make games again. He told me I was wasting my life, that I had wasted my time at school. Also, I mean, other graduate students that I was peer level with were like, "What a stupid thing you're doing." Flash forward to 1996, one of those same peer level grad students, I hired him to do the Mac version of Fallout.
Nice.
Flash forward to 1999, that my thesis advisor, who's now the dean of the computer science department, calls me to ask me if I will come teach a class on game development at UCI.
Wow.
And I did. So somewhere between 1991 and 1999, it completely flip-flopped. The pendulum swung to the other side. And instead of me wasting my life, I was, "Hey, how can you get other students here interested in doing what you're doing?"
That kind of lines up too, because I was like less than 10 like in that time, but I was playing games like Patrick said, and I feel like I did see a big move from just your basic Marios and like bleeps and bloops of like the Atari and the old NES games into, we talk about RPGs a lot, Final Fantasies, things like that, and like that's towards the PlayStation era of games for people like listening in, and like you got games that were not for kids. You got games that are very adult. I know Patrick tells the story about how gaming, well, I think it was Final Fantasy, helped him learn to like read better, things like that. So games moved from this entertainment idea to this full on like media. Well, it's still entertainment, I suppose, but it's something you could do different and special and unique, and it became its own thing. And I think it was
definitely
the exact same era. It's
like
perfect.
entertainment to arts and entertainment to like full on business. Speaking of RPGs, obviously with our name being RPGaymer, and Jason and I like have both been RPG enthusiasts for basically
a long time.
our lives. I think you being a master of RPGs, what makes this genre so I mean from our perspective.
Tim's like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah. What makes this genre so special? Like what is it about RPGs that are so special?
For me, I mean, I played tabletop from my early teens, D&D, And when D&D didn't have a number, so I wasn't playing D&D 3.5. I was
Yeah.
playing
Right.
D&D. And
Advanced D&D.
that game, I remember, it blew my mind because until then it was all card games and board games and things like that. And this was a game that was hard to explain to people. It was open-ended. It was all in your imagination. At first, we didn't even use figures. We just drew on graph paper and pointed at things and told. It was like me and 4 friends sitting around a table telling stories to each other. And it was an interesting time and just explaining it to other people. But of all people, my mom was the one who said she worked at the Judge Advocate General. I mean, she was in the Navy and she had security clearance and all that. And she worked with the admirals. And one day she came home, I think I was 13, and she said, some of the boys at work are playing this game. The boys were captains and admirals in the Navy, and the game was D&D. Nice. So we went one Saturday to an admiral's house, and I learned how to play D&D. And on the way home, she said, let's stop off at the store and buy you I think we bought the basic kit.
Yeah.
And then later I got like the player's handbook and the monster manual and the DM's guide. But that got me going. And then after playing some online or some computer RPGs, I was like, I want to do this. Yeah. This is my thing. It's my jam.
You know, Patrick, it's funny how often, like, with the guests we have on the show, how often that base of D&D comes up. It makes sense. Like, it totally makes sense. But I feel like we're getting so much further away from, like, the start of that I think people don't realize the impact that game has. So I think it's great you bring that up and had that experience. And it sounds like you had a really supportive mom, which was really good, too.
She was awesome.
Good to hear.
She comes up on my videos all the time because, you know, people will... Just recently, somebody said, why are there already so many dogs in your games? I said, my mom wouldn't say no if anybody needed to rehome an animal of any kind. So we had cats and dogs and rabbits and chickens and a skunk, an alligator.
Wow.
I had a horse in my backyard, and I didn't live in a rural area. So
that's awesome.
It was an interesting childhood.
I think that's kind of the beauty. I mean, playing RPGs and whatnot, where when you tend to be locked in a very rural area, there's almost like a fantasy-like nature to everything. I know when I moved from Canada to the US, like, we lived in the middle of nowhere, so
the fantasy.
RPGs were a part of that escape with me. Like, I would read fantasy novels. I would be playing a lot of fantasy-involved games. There's almost like that beauty of being in that outdoor area, even if it's you're surrounded by farm fields. Like, it's almost like they're kindred spirits in a way.
Yeah. You have like a bit of like wonder with RPGs or D&D, things like that you don't get with other mediums or stories or genres. I think it makes it super unique.
That and the interactivity is what got me going. It's like, it's not passive like reading a book or watching a movie. I loved the interactivity.
I would say that's a part of what makes RPGs so much of a special genre to me too, where there are a lot of games that are like games for the sake of being games, and I think those are good. Like, I think it's great you can just pick up and play, but being able to interact with the world around you, and some of those impactful decisions, and watching how a narrative or a world can evolve based on your decisions, like true RPGs like that, it's truly incredible. It's what excites me the most about playing D&D, when you have a great DM that will have consequence for your actions, not as punishment, but just to really buy into that narrative on what you're playing. And the same thing for some of the great games that we've played, where, you know, it's the same thing. I know Fallout has always been a big what you do will change the atmosphere of the world, and that's just so cool.
That actually directly came. We were playing tabletop games, mainly GURPS, in the evening, and I made a tiny little dungeon, and I think it had 6 rooms, and 3 different groups played through it, and they all had wildly different experiences. And Leonard Borarsky, who'd become the art director and so much more on Fallout, he played the first night, and then he watched the next 2, and he said, what were you doing different? And I said, I wasn't doing anything different. The 6 groups, or the 3 groups, were wildly different player builds. They did different things. They reacted to things differently. They had different skills in their builds. And I said, you were sitting there watching them. They chose different things. They did different things. And I just reacted to that. And he said, could we do that in a game? And I went, Yes, but we'd all have to agree.
The light bulb.
I'd have to get buy-in from designers and programmers and artists and make it a very certain way, but we could do it. And that's what Fallout was. Can we do what we did on Thursday night or GURPS night? Can we do that in a role-playing game on a computer?
So every time you talk about the things that you do, I always see this like wonderful, passionate smile on your face. And I love it, just because it really shows that you care about like what you make and what you do. So I want to like pry into that a little bit more and kind of like think about what parts of game design fill your cup. Like what is it that like generates that smile? And a little like extra addition to that. Is it the same now for some of the later projects that you've done versus when you first started?
I'll answer the last one first. It hasn't changed. It's kind of always been the same thing. I love the brainstorming at the beginning where we're just trying to pick a setting. It's like, what is this going to be? It was super fun to do it for Fallout. It was super fun to do it on Arcanum. It was fun to do it on all the ones subsequent that I got to do that. Sometimes when you get an IP and like, here's the setting, we just jump straight to stage 2, which is, okay, what story do we want to tell?
Mm-hmm.
And that's fun. And that's more of a group thing. And then what I really love doing is once those things are kind of pinned down, I like going, okay, now let's come up with some system mechanics that A, support the setting and story we're trying to do, and B, are systemic. And by that I mean, I never wanted to make a game, and we started this with Fallout, and we tried to get better at it. I never wanted to make a game where everything was scripted, where you had to anticipate everything you wanted to do, and then scripted a response. I wanted it to be systemic, where I just coded a bunch of stuff. And, okay, because that door has hit points and a lock on it, if you don't have a lockpick, you can blow it open with an explosive. Mm-hmm. That just came out of the game's rules. We didn't go, okay, let's make sure the explosives work on that door.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first time it happened in Fallout, I think the door fell over. You blew it, and it just fell over like a dead person. I'm like, no,
nice.
Let's recode that. It should just blow open or blow to pieces. But
it's like someone ran into it, and it just like...
Yeah.
one time there was an error where the door opened, and then when it closed, it went like this, and then it knew it wasn't back, and so it just kept doing that, and it ran off the screen.
Oh, bye-bye door.
Bye door.
Flew away.
Yeah.
I wish I had video back then. There were so many bloopers on the original Fallout. But
I can't imagine how fun it would be to see some of those things, even just in early design.
Some of the stuff QA would find, and they'd send me an email saying, you should try this because you're not going to believe what happens. And I'm like, oops. But yeah, that's what got me going, is that what fills my cup is once we got the setting and once we got the story, I love that system mechanics to let you realize all the different things you want to do as a player in that setting.
It kind of sounds like what you're saying is good design is backwards design in a way, where like you kind of start with the worlds, the big picture, what you want people to get out of it. And then everything else kind of like filters based on that notion. And I can kind of agree with that from being a teacher and a department chair, where like, well, that was one of the things that I would teach new teachers, where you might have a lot of things that you want to teach your students, but at the end of the day, you need to think of those like bigger picture outcomes. And it almost seems like the same thing here, where, you know, if you have this wonderful idea for a world, that is the starting point, and then you kind of fill in some of those things, whether it's like, what does a door look like in this fantasy world, and what would happen when you blow it apart with a rocket launcher, you know what I mean, or a shotgun, or how do these little things impact everything. So I think that's like an incredible way to think about designing a world. That's great. Another thing I wanted to kind of talk about, and this kind of goes in tandem with what your channel is all about. You do an excellent job of connecting with aspiring developers, or maybe current developers, about all of your knowledge and sharing it. And one thing that you said in our emails is that you think a lot of like this institutional knowledge might be gone in the future. Is that something that you can kind of elaborate on more?
Yeah, I'm one of the first people to actually retire from a career.
Mm-hmm.
I've known people who've done game development for a few years, and then they didn't like it, or they thought they could make more money or have better hours, particularly somewhere else, and so they left the industry. But I think I'm the start of the generation that's going to be retiring after a whole career in it. And yes, there are things that have changed technologically, and there are things that have changed in production process and stuff, but there's a lot of basic game development knowledge that I think is just being lost as people start to retire. And I tried writing a memoir, and what I discovered is I'm really bad at writing a memoir. So I forget, I think one of the producers I worked with at Obsidian said, why don't you just do a YouTube channel and do little story blocks?
This basically is a memoir, right? Like what you're doing now is
kind of is, yeah.
It's more consumable in a way too.
And also people can because it's short 10 to 15 minute videos, and I try to put them in categories. You can just jump to what you like. If people don't want to hear about Arcanum, or they don't want to hear about Troika, I have it broken down by game, by company, and then by what process I'm talking about. I'm talking about programming, design, production. I do talk a little bit about art, even though I'm incapable of doing art, just because I've worked with enough artists to know what I and other people do to annoy them.
Nice.
So
I think that is kind of like a great tool for so many people that want or even just want to pick the brain of like, what was it like? Do you think that more of like the veteran developers should be doing this?
I hope they would do it. I've talked to a few because I found out why they're not. And some of it is the obvious, well, if you're still working in the industry and you're covered under NDA, you can't say these stories. Some of them they're worried because no matter how I cast my stories, some of my viewers want to put everybody into a hero-villain role.
Right.
Even sometimes they put me in the villain role, and I said, okay, let's do a whole video about things I did where I seem to be the bad guy to a lot of people. Like, I don't think anyone feels they're the bad guy, but sometimes you have to make decisions that people don't like and aren't good for some people, but that's just the way things work. So I try to get enough of these stories in there that people get a broad range of, here's what it was like for me to be just, a member of a team, maybe low on the totem pole. Here's what it was like to be in charge of the team. Here's what it was like to run a company. So you can get perspectives. Because I found a lot of people were like, employers are horrible. The employees are always, every employee's great and every employee's bad. And I'm like, let me tell you some stories about bad employees. Or they flip-flop and go, you're right. Employees are lazy, bad people. And I'm like, let me tell you some stories about bad employers. And let me tell you stories about me being bad just because I had to make a bad decision or I brought something up that derailed things. So I hope people see that it's not a story of heroes and villains. It's a story of people just trying to do their best and trying to get a game out. And in a environment that's very complex and there's a lot of plate spinning and cogs turning.
Isn't it funny how wild the internet is, and how much as much as we love our viewers, there are always going to be those viewers that will vilify someone or vilify you for the smallest thing you said. Like, I haven't told Jason this yet, but one of the most recent reels that he made, it was on Super Metroid, had the slightest thing wrong in it, where like something occurs on a different world and a person left a nasty comment about it, and it's like, does it really matter? Like, does the accuracy of this minute thing, this little mistake, really matter? Or for you, in some ways, you're kind of saying, just because I'm talking about these things from my perspective doesn't mean I'm doing it in a way that you need to take sides. It's just for you to like hear a part of the story, because I'm sure you even know, like, everything has different sides to a story.
Oh, and I've had some people I worked with contact me and say, I don't remember it happening that way. And sometimes I'm like, well, I have notes. But at one time we even found that while my notes weren't wrong, my interpretation of my own notes might be wrong. Like, yes, that person told you A and that person told you B, but A didn't cause B. And I'm like, oh, you're right. I may be reading into my own notes. So I just try to let people know, I'm telling you these stories so that if you ever want to get into game development, here's a lot of things that can happen. They may not happen to you, and you're going to have your own road. But maybe I can help you not be as surprised and maybe be a little more prepared.
You know, Tim, you bringing up that you're one of the generations of people that are going to be the first to retire as a career. I had never thought about that, and I agree. I feel like there's some people that I followed too. I know some people know like Shigeru Miyamoto, things like that from Nintendo, really big names that are still kind of around. But when these people retire, there is going to be this sense of a loss of a style or a way that someone creates, a knowledge for sure. Like, what do you feel about that? What would the impact be for aspiring developers, developers that may look to you already as someone that's a veteran that they look up to, things like that?
I think when I think about like me and some other people retiring, we we had to figure some things out on how to do them in games. So we had to figure out a process that we now know. It's very different than for people who enter the industry later and just get immersed in that process without really understanding why it's done that way or why very specific things are in place to avoid known problems. Like, we do it this way because if you don't do it this way, these other things happen. And I have started to see some evidence of people saying when after they make a game or two going, well, we should do it this way. And there's going to be less and less people around going, I'm not telling you not to do that, but it will cause this problem. So if you don't think you know how to fix that problem, I wouldn't do it that way. And that's the kind of knowledge I see going away. There are some processes of making games that I don't think they've changed. And I'm just worried about the next generation having to go through the same experimentation to come to the same conclusion of, oh yeah, you can't make a game that way.
Right.
Almost as if it's a waste of time, right? Like you listen to the people that already know, so that way you can just make an even greater product. I don't think it's in a way that you're coming across arrogant or a know-it-all. I just truly think, like, if you're saying, like you said, the design, the process of design really hasn't changed, then you already know what the hurdles are.
Well, like, I was really lucky. I got to meet and talk with Richard Garriott in 2007 when I was coming on board on NCSoft. And what was amazing to me at that point was, here was the person who made the game that made me want to make games back in the 80s. And he and I talked for quite a while. In fact, someone had to break us up and say, hey, we're here for another reason. They said, can you guys nerd out later? I'm like, did he just tell Richard Garriott not to nerd out? But that's the kind of thing. It's like, I really wanted, there was so much stuff I knew he knew. And I was like, how do I absorb all this in 30 minutes? And that's the kind of thing that makes me worried that everything he learned making an entire RPG series, things about making sequels, how to expand the world, how to extend character creation, but still make these all feel like they're part of the same Ultima universe. Gone. It's gone. So I thought maybe I can help that not happen a little bit.
I have a bit of a follow-up question to that one too. And you've been fortunate to work at lots of places. You had your own company as well for game design, and I am not a game designer, so I may be way like off on this thought. But when you do have those new hires or maybe even veteran designers, producers, things like that coming in, is there like I would hesitate to say a training that they would do, but is there a way that we follow something like that's written, or is it more so a verbal communication between previous workers that would kind of pass on that development torch?
Early on, like when we were at Troika and then later NCSoft, I would ask people what they've played. Just because I'm like, I'm not going to hire you because you've never played any of my games. But it was more like, do you understand like what an RPG is with multiple, a nonlinear RPG, a reactive RPG? Just so they understood that's what we're trying to make. So that's what we're hiring you on to do. So if all you can think of our linear RPGs, be forewarned, that's not what we're doing. Later on, as teams got bigger, I think when people came on board, they could just look around and see what people were doing. There would be online Confluence pages they could jump to and see how things were done, see what the lore was. And there were lots of examples of quests and stories and NPCs that have already been written for them to look at. And I think that kind of thing just comes naturally when you come on board.
Cool. Cool. Makes sense.
Well, one of the things that I've been waiting to ask you as the resident homosexual on Team RPGaymer, because Jason, of course, is a hetero. After many years of trying to make him not be in college.
Wow. Okay. This is a different
No,
podcast. So.
yeah. No, I guess like one thing for me that I always like talking to anyone on the further side of the Kinsey scale, and this is only if you're open to sharing it, is
Sure.
was there a difference in the timing when you came out professionally versus when you came out personally, and what was that like to have to, if there was a difference in the timing, to teeter those two aspects of your life?
I thought you were going to say to teeter that tot.
Perfect.
Which
Well, now I want tater tots.
Tater tots.
there was a slight difference. I came out personally about a year before I came out professionally.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even 2 years, because since I owned Troika, I was very cognizant of the fact that the game industry is somewhat conservative. The people in it are very liberal for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But the industry itself was very conservative. And this is stuff I had bumped into before when I put children in Fallout and they could be killed. People were like, "Oh, you can't do that." And I'm like, "Well, then do we take out the kids? Do we make them vulnerable?" It was my game was very much about you act, game reacts. So, you can do bad things and then the game says you're a bad person. So I was very worried that if I came out publicly while owning Troika, that we may miss out on contracts. Publishers may pass by on us because they didn't want the gay game developer.
Right.
And some of this came from, I worked with a publisher who asked us to remove gay content. And I finally got them to stop I checked back to the contract and I realized any changes had to be in writing. So I asked them, please submit that to me in writing with your reasons for wanting that character or that quest or that content removed. And then they stopped. Because no one wanted to be on record of like, yeah, we hate that gay character. Right. But already I found myself going, this particular publisher is very conservative. So I came out personally. People knew, my family knew, but I didn't do it publicly until after Troika was shut down.
I can't imagine how hard that is, to have this beautiful project that you're working on and to have to worry about who you are as a person and how that could impact whether someone is going to help you further your art. Like that is is unnerving.
There's a sense of responsibility. Leonard Boreski and Jason Anderson and I have all talked about this when we ran Troika. There was suddenly this added responsibility you have at our biggest we had like 30 35 people, and you're beholden to them. You pay their salaries. You if something happened and we lost a contract and we had to lay people off, you're really messing with people's lives. And you feel that in a way you don't when you're an employee and you're like,
Yeah.
Oh, I may quit and go over here. That's totally fine and that's your thing, but you can't make decisions like that as an employer because you literally disrupt so many people's lives. And what I did not want to happen is for me to go to my two business partners and go, hey, I'm gay now, and let's hope that doesn't disrupt any of our publisher contracts. So I just basically was like, okay, I'm not going to have that be... I'm not going to throw something out there for publishers to potentially pass on us for.
Sure. I guess that kind of ties into the next phase of where I kind of want to take this is, do you think that there are still hurdles for queer people working in the gaming industry, or have they shifted in where they appear, or are they still as staunch as things like that?
I'll preface my answer with saying things are better. They're a lot better.
Sure.
However, I still had people when they applied to Obsidian, and Obsidian was great. I had no issues with Obsidian. The worst problem that ever happened to me at Obsidian was they would do a blood drive And people jokingly
Wow.
say to me, "Why aren't you going?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not allowed to give blood because I'm gay." And one person got mad about that and said, "I'm writing the Red Cross." But that was the worst thing that ever happened. They were great, but when people would apply, they'd sometimes, you go out to lunch with them. You do interviews, but sometimes you break in the middle of the day and have lunch. And I'd have someone be walking and they'd slow down with me and let the other people get a little ahead, and then they'd just go, "Hey, I know you're gay. I'm gay too. Is it okay here?" They really wanted that assurance that,
Yeah.
yeah. And I would tell
the
them,
gays have a way to flock to find each other truly. Like, even if it's someone that you know that you don't necessarily like, just the fact that you have that commonality is so safe. Yeah.
some of them had had issues at other companies. Others were like uprooting and moving across country, and they didn't want to move here and then find out, oh, this is not a good place for me to be. So I got that, and I was glad, and that's when I realized, wow, it's kind of good that I'm publicly out, because they know to ask me, and I think they'd also trust that I'd give them the right answer. Even that, though, there were people who were closeted, even though they saw me as, like, even at a director level, I was out, no issues whatsoever. They still stayed in the closet, and I realized, that's their decision to make. Some of them I knew, they confided with me. Some I just knew, and I was like, that's their decision to make. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knew this was fine. This was a safe space company. Everybody was great, and it was. But those kind of things still, I mean, I don't know what was going on in their personal lives. Maybe they couldn't come out because of family. Maybe they couldn't come out because of friends they knew. I didn't know what was going on, but at least I could tell people, hey, Obsidian's great, and you won't have any issues if you work here.
What time, like, what era about was that?
I started at Obsidian at 2011.
Okay.
I had been out for at least 5, maybe closer to 7 years before that. So
we came out the same year.
It was a good year.
Yeah, it was a good year.
Much later in life for me. I was in my late 30s when I came out. So I think that for the 10 years that I was at Obsidian, actually I was at Obsidian for 9 years. I mean, I still contract with them, but 9 years as an employee. I would say throughout that time, when people would apply, I might get asked a question privately. Just, they wanted to make sure everything was cool and how people acted there, and I said it was fine.
Is that the kind of thing that you would want to see more of for queer people working in the industry, where like more check-ins from the above, or are there other things that you would want to see more of as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've said lots of times, I really wish there had been someone like me back in the 80s and 90s for me to ask questions to, because the road had a lot of potholes in it and a lot of speed bumps. So I'm happy to be able to tell people, hey, there's a pothole here, or it's smooth sailing here. I do know I've had people contact me, like I had a trans person contact me, and the first thing I said was, we're on the same highway, but we're in different lanes. So I don't know exactly what's coming on your lane, but let me tell you about some things that you're going to have to look for. And that helped, but I didn't want to be like, hey, I know exactly what your experience is going to be. So, but it's just nice knowing there's somebody else who's already there and they've done some of this.
Yeah.
Where when I had to do it, it was like, I don't know anybody who's been in the industry longer than me, because it will be in 3 months I will have been in the industry for 43 years.
Wow.
But I don't know anybody in the industry who's been in the industry who's gay as long as me, or anybody older than me. Also, I don't want to be too much of a downer, but a lot of older gay men, there's not as many older gay men because of HIV and AIDS.
Yeah.
The generation before me was decimated.
Truly, so, yeah. It's super sad time.
So when I'm complaining about not having mentors, I also understand why I didn't have mentors.
Right.
But that still doesn't change the fact that if somebody had been around in the 80s or up to the mid 90s, for me to ask questions, that would have been awesome.
Also, I think too, just the bravery of being kind of touching back way on what we were talking about earlier, where nerd had such a negative connotation, or being interested in games had a negative perspective from other people. Also, being gay, so being a gay nerd, even from when I was in high
Yeah.
school, like that was almost like two targets on
Yep.
you. And just like you're saying, like I wish I had known people like you when I was in high school, because I feel like it might have pushed me more to careers where
Yep.
I felt like I
Sure.
can be a game developer and gay, because I know now, like, it seems like everyone is gay, not actually, but
Yeah.
but it's just a lot
Yeah.
more commonly accepted,
Yeah.
especially in the gamer space where there are tons of gay gamers. But like, I didn't find many people like me until late college,
Mhm.
where, like, that were actually into video games and gay. Like, I feel like they didn't exist. Like, we were a rarity.
I went. I started. I didn't do a lot of conventions. I didn't travel. I don't travel well. Um, but I did a couple gay gaming conventions. A couple in Australia, one in California, and I. That's what I felt happening was there were a lot of people who were like, "Oh, these are my people,"
Yeah.
and what surprises me is so I started my YouTube channel almost exactly a year ago. It was a year ago yesterday,
Hey.
and
Congratulations.
Yep.
it was my year anniversary. And I still have people who come to my channel and find I have one video, just one out of 330, where I say, I'm going to talk about being gay in the game industry.
Mm.
And there are people go, oh, I didn't know you were gay. And I'm like, how? Not that, I mean, I'm not overly surprised, but I'm like, if you know who I am, how did you not know that? It's come up a lot. There are lots of videos about it. There are interviews, but even then, I think there are some people that you have to look to find the people who are like you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always obvious.
Well, before we get on to some of the more like casual topics like Fallout and like fun tips on game design and whatnot, I want to ask one more question about just like gay and queer representation in gaming. And I know you were on for a portion of Fallout 2. And there are two gay characters in that game, right? Did you feel like it was hard to push for that queer representation in that game? Like, is that the game that you were kind of talking about earlier, where you didn't know if the characters were going to make it through?
No, actually, that was a later game, in fact.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
The Fallout 2, what surprised me is the whole idea. If you're talking about the farmer's son and the farmer's daughter,
I think it's Davin and Miria are the characters.
what,
And
what I remember is there was a quest where you're at a farm and you ask to sleep. You can sleep in the barn, and then the son or daughter can hit on you, and you can respond, and it's independent of your gender. So you can be a male and the son hits on you. You can be female and have the daughter hit on you, and vice versa. They can also, the son can hit on you if you're female. And this was another designer's idea, and I love how he handled it, because you think that the farmer comes out and finds you in the morning and he's angry.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, this is going into something, gay hate.
right.
But what the farmer says is, I don't know what's going on, but you don't do that unless you're married. So you now have to marry my son. And he has a shotgun. He's like,
Oh, nice.
and you're like, oh, he's mad that you didn't have wedlock.
Wedlock.
And
yeah.
now we want you to have wedlock. So it was a nice and clever and fun way of handling it. That he's not homophobic. He's just, he wants his kid to be married before they do marital things. And it wasn't my idea. It came from one of the level designers. And I like how they handled it. And I thought it was clever and nice and supportive, and it actually got the remaining. I think I left about the time that was going in, so it got finished up and approved and went through all the testing cycle without me. So that was great.
I love it when game designers pull the rug out under you
Yeah.
and things like that when you assume that's what's going on. Dragon Quest XI has a character that you can assume is gay, and a part of his journey is his father's lack of acceptance for him.
Yeah.
And you think because he is such a flamboyant character that it's like, oh, his dad doesn't accept him because he's gay. But it truly, the dad doesn't accept him because he doesn't want to be a knight.
Yeah.
And has no problem with the flamboyancy, just the fact that he doesn't want to be a knight. And it's just such like a good moment for people like me, or just like for anyone, like you're saying, oh, here's another homophobic story, and it's like, no, it has nothing to do with that at all. It's just good storytelling.
We actually removed a companion quest from Outer Worlds because we already had a really cool ace character written, so we didn't want to make one of the other companions queer as well. But there was at one point one of the female companions, she brings home her fiance, and it's a woman, and her parents get really angry. And it turns out it has nothing to do with her being a woman. It's because they wanted her to marry a doctor or a lawyer.
Oh.
And they're furious and it's because everything in the Outer Worlds was classist.
Yeah,
Nobody cared about your race, your gender, your orientation. They only cared about what you did for a living.
Yeah.
And pretty much how much you made.
Well, thank you for answering that question, because I was very curious about how that was received, and it's good to think that a game as early as Fallout 2 was still had, I think, probably one of the earliest representations of a queer character like that.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the history of Tim and whatnot, that wraps up our part of our conversation here. But I'm excited for us to get to part 2, because you mentioned the Outer Worlds, and I have some questions revolving around that and some other things. So Jason, why don't you go ahead and take us away for our break for part 1?
Yes. Thank you indeed, Tim. Appreciate it. And thank you, listeners, for being here, listening with us. We will take a quick break. But before we go, remember, you can support us, follow us, and give us your feedback over on Twitter/X, Instagram at HeyRPGaymer, and we do have our Discord too, so chat with us on Discord. We love chatting over there all about games, RPGs, and anything in between. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe as well, so we know we're doing a good job where we can improve, and we will be right back.
And that's a wrap on part 1 of this week's episode. We'll be back next week with part 2, so you can hear the rest of our gaming-related shenanigans. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app, so you never miss an episode of RPGaymer.